Hello and welcome to the Circular Economy Show podcast. I'm Pippa, and in this week's episode, we're addressing some frequently asked questions we're faced with at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And to help me out, I'm joined by my colleagues Seb Read, Content Lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Sarah O'Carroll, our Institutions Lead. Welcome both.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me, Pippa. I understand that you put a poll out and I was voted as the person that people wanted to hear answering these questions. Is that true?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I want to start off with a topic that comes up quite a lot when you talk to people about the circular economy, particularly people that don't work very closely with it, which is recycling. So as somebody that tries to do their best in life, I try to stick to quite a close recycling regime. But it's quite controversial in circular economy circles, isn't it, Sarah? Is it a bad thing? How helpful is it when we talk about the circular economy?
I mean, recycling is not a bad thing. It's definitely a good thing, but it's not going to be the silver bullet that solves everything. I mean, we're not going to have a silver bullet for the circular economy, but we need more than recycling. So recycling is kind of what we talk about as end of pipe in terms of circulating products and materials. Recycling is definitely a solution when it comes to that, but the circular economy kind of starts right at the beginning in how we design products and materials. And so we can't just rely on recycling. We have to think about design, we have to think about reuse, repair, remanufacturing, composting, how we grow food. All of those things are the circular economy as well.
Yeah. And Seb, what do you think about that?
Well, and I think like it's a very common conversation when I say to people, oh, I work in circular economy, people say, well, yeah, I like recycle my cardboard, I recycle this thing. And very often that's the first conversation with businesses. They'll say something along the lines of, okay, so yeah, we're thinking about how can we recycle our products. And as Sarah said, that's not a bad thing, but actually you're kind of starting at the wrong point in the way in which you're thinking about the solutions that are out there. Like for starters, like you can't really recycle effectively unless you design the product differently from the outset anyway. So you have to think about what's going into the system. And secondly, actually recycling is effectively how we take materials and return them back into the system. But if you think about the foundations, or people might be familiar with the foundation's kind of butterfly illustration, what we kind of know is that things like reuse, redistribution, remanufacturing, they require less energy, less labor to return, to keep things in use at a really high value or circulate products and materials, the second principle of the circular economy. So the answer is obviously that recycling is a good thing, but it's almost quite helpful to think about it as the last resort for a product, a material, a component, as opposed to the starting point when we have the conversation. So I spend a lot of time saying, no, it's not recycling, or saying not only recycling.
Yeah. And I think we also, when we're approached by guests, that people that want to come on the show as guests, there are a lot of people who are doing recycling, upcycling stuff and calling it circular. But I think there's a risk there of the definition of circular economy being a bit confused.
100%. I mean, it's problematic when recycling and the circular economy are spoken about as one and the same thing, because they're certainly not. I agree with Seb. Recycling is such a helpful place to start a conversation, but it needs to be a conversation starter. And one of the things we say all the time at the foundation as well is that the design choices that we make right at the start, in terms of how we're thinking about designing products and materials, impact 80% of the environmental impacts. And so recycling is just kind of one of those things, and it can't be the whole conversation at all, because there are so many opportunities in the circular economy, so many more than just kind of recycling.
And the challenges globally are massively different, right? Like, so in some parts of the world, you're talking about actually quite massive infrastructure investment even to get systems in place. And again, the question is what's the optimal design of that system if you have nothing in the first place? And in other parts of the world, you know, where we are now, for instance, in the UK, there's quite sophisticated recycling systems, but because of some of the things Sarah's been talking about, that, you know, like PET, for instance, as a material is technically quite a recyclable material, but it's very rarely recycled back into new PET because the design of the products, the design of the systems those products exist in, the ability to keep some of those products in use don't actually mean that PET will maybe turn into carpet or some other lower value material really quickly.
And
because of the systems.
You've been here quite a while, Seb. You've been in, nearly
Even
a decade?
Though I'm really young.
Yes, you started as a child. And I wonder, have you seen a change in that decade or so of people's understanding of the difference between recycling and circular economy?
I think you could say broadly the conversation has moved what we'd call it upstream. So the conversation has moved into a space of talking about design and innovation. I think the term has become a lot more prevalent, and to some degree, like there's a risk of dilution there. It kind of gets attached to lots of different things as a consequence. So I think not the confusion, but the conflation of like recycling as circular economy still exists, but definitely there's a much bigger conversation that exists now than when I joined the foundation in 2014 around upstream design, innovation, what policies and financial measures need to be put into the economy to produce circular economy outcomes.
In the policy world, thinking about national governments and city governments, we're starting to see this shift in the conversation from waste management, where recycling is a waste management strategy, into resource management. And what are the kinds of infrastructures that you need to be able to support resource management? So collection and sorting and washing, to be able to reuse, repair, kind of refurbish products, which I think is really exciting as well.
Yeah, interesting you bring institutions in there, because I think one reason that we often focus on recycling in those conversations is because it's the individual action piece. And that's another frequently asked question that comes up quite a lot, is what is the role of the individual? Should users even notice that this transition to a circular economy is happening? What are your views on that? Seb, maybe you can start us off.
What I often get asked is, what is the role of the consumer in a circular economy? And personally, I hate the word consumer. Like, it's interesting because like this microphone, for instance, which is quite tempting actually to try and consume it because it's sort of in your face. But like, if I tried to consume this microphone, it would do my body like quite serious damage, even if I could get it into my system somehow. It's quite a convenient word to say. It's quite a convenient thing almost to say that once something is sold to someone, they have consumed it, irrespective of whether it's consumable. And in reality, what we do, of course, is we use this microphone for a period of time. And I think that's quite interesting in the context of the kind of role of the individual, the other way that question kind of gets expressed, because in a linear economy, every part of the chain has been optimized, from taking something out of the ground to making it to using it. And the agency of the customer consumer in that space is only to consume. And so people kind of go down this avenue of saying, well, when you change that system, they assume that, well, it's just about what different choices an individual can make, because that's the only thing you're sort of doing in a linear economy. What I think I think, like what's really interesting then about when we talk about circular economy is, well, what is the actual changed role of a person in that system? And actually what the circular economy does, I think, is like involves that individual in the economy a lot more. Like they might be involved in repairing or the circulation of products. They might be involved in engaging actually with the economy in a different way. And the final thing on that is, so I think there's something in that mix around actually like moving past this notion of consumer. The other thing actually is, in terms of the awareness, I do think that circular economy and some of the work that we do with things like this podcast it's interesting to think like, what role do people play in creating advocacy for change? And so like people thinking and understanding that circular economy is a good thing is probably very good for businesses and policymakers who are trying to bring it to life.
Yeah.
So that kind of education and understanding of the idea is really valuable, and education is an action.
And Sarah, I think when we've looked at things in the past like carbon footprints and thinking about whether you fly too much and what you're eating, there's a lot of onus put on the individual there. But you work with institutions who hypothetically have a lot of power to make big change. How do you see the role of the individual, the user, the consumer, whatever you want to call them?
I mean, I think this conversation is so interesting. Definitely what we see in Europe is an increasing kind of conversation around the role of the individual, how to tackle consumption and behavior change, because this opportunity that you have to create demand for circular products and services by being able to tap into the potential of individual choices that are being made. And as part of that, we're seeing a shift as well in awareness raising campaigns away from just like what you need to do, so stop flying, as an example, to the different choices that you can make. So don't just fly, take a ferry, take the train, take the bus. Like, can you cycle? Can you walk? And so kind of more and more really sophisticated awareness raising campaigns tackled at changing consumer behavior, also including things like gamification to kind of make that more exciting for the individual. But ultimately, citizen behavior change, individuals changing their behavior, can only optimize or kind of make our very linear system better. It's not going to fundamentally change the system. And so at the institutional and policy level, it always kind of goes back to then like, but we need to change business models. And to do that, we need an enabling policy environment, and businesses need funding to be able to transition quickly.
Yeah.
And so then that's kind of the space that we play in.
And I think it's really good that you've reminded us that we're working within a system there, and we're talking about systems change, because I know our big food redesign challenge is to address the fact that consumers don't have a lot of choice when they go to the supermarket, for example. You know, most of our food is made up of 4 types of food. Where's the choice in that for consumers? And broadening that out.
How do you even assess it as well?
Yeah.
I've tried to look at product labels before, and sometimes things that people tell you are good and they're not good in 6 months' time. So as an individual, trying to understand even what a good choice is versus a bad choice is really difficult.
And you've got other priorities as well. You're looking at price, you've got time, all the rest of it as well.
Yeah. We definitely see the topics around convenience, like how easy is it for someone? Can they access it? Like, do they live too far away to be able to do something different? Yeah. What is the price point? Can they afford to make a different choice? And ultimately, if we change business models, then it means that individuals can only make right choices because only the right choices are presented to them.
Exactly. You want to choose the easiest path because that's what most people will do.
And that points to where the agency is, because that question partly can come from a place of what can I do? And my answer to that is don't just think about yourself as a consumer of things and that's all you do in the economy. But it can also come from a point of view of we need to see this demand signal in order to do something. But the reality is it's actually how do organizations design really powerful solutions that drive people into the circular economy. If you look at the kind of boom in resale, repair, fashion models, for instance, a lot of that has come from innovative businesses putting solutions out there that people are drawn to and want to engage with and are convenient and affordable.
They're good businesses. Forget circular. They're just good businesses.
And the products are cool. And the products taste great.
Yeah. Or somebody makes something really convenient for you to do instead of you having to maybe drive to a different town because that's where the 1 waste shop is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to quite a different topic. But Seb, earlier you mentioned our butterfly diagram, and it takes us back to the pillars of what a circular economy is. So eliminate waste, cycle products and materials, and regenerate nature. And I think we talk a lot about eliminating waste and quite a lot about keeping things in circulation. But I wondered if you guys could talk a little bit about how the circular economy helps nature, because it feels like quite a hot topic at the moment. Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So we published our report, The Nature Imperative, a few years ago. And I guess that for us was kind of our first big explorations into the opportunity of regenerating nature as one of the 3 principles for the circular economy. Kind of our big messages there are around reducing threats to nature by eliminating waste and pollution, leaving space for nature by circulating products and materials, and regenerating nature to enable nature to thrive. And from there, we've continued the exploration largely through our food work. And most recently, we've started to do that through thinking about buildings and construction. So we have a report coming out pretty soon, which will detail the opportunities there. What we're seeing is opportunity for hundreds of thousands of jobs being created through taking nature positive circular decisions. What we're seeing is really great positive impacts for health because of reduced air pollution, water pollution, etc., but also the opportunity to create more nutritional food because of the way that ingredients and food is produced. And at the policy level, I think we're really kind of just at the start in the conversations that we're having, but we are seeing momentum move in the right direction, which is really great. At the national government level, Brazil in 2017 set really ambitious reforestation targets. Yeah. We've been really pleased to see the progress that they've made. So they've reached more than 20% of their targets already. And England has implemented a biodiversity net gain policy, which states that developers have to increase or improve the biodiversity in and around their developments by 10%, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And at the city level, more and more, we're also seeing cities not just have a circular economy or climate change plan, but also a biodiversity or kind of nature plan for their city, where they really look at the opportunities around urban planning and food to be able to make a positive impact on nature and biodiversity.
I think what I'm hearing there is that this is becoming much less of a niche thing as well. Like it's broadening out into the everyday rather than just people that work in sustainability or, you know, green jobs. It's making every job a green job. Seb, have you seen that?
I mean, I think that the circular economy is a business imperative and a kind of political imperative as well. So that's what kind of, with these big issues like the climate crisis and the nature crisis, that's seeing it shift up that agenda. And what we've been talking about broadly on this podcast is how does it actually fundamentally tie to economic transformation? And in that sense, it is coming out of a kind of niche but still has much more to do to be at the heart of the kind of business economic debate. I mean, just coming back to nature and biodiversity specifically, I've got the habit of butchering numbers, so I'm not. So this isn't an absolute quote.
Give us a scope.
I don't know, but in that Nature Imperative report, it attributed something like 90% or around 90% of biodiversity loss to the way in which we extract and process our materials and the way in which we manage our land and grow our food. And if you think about how much effort goes into conservation, which is obviously similar to recycling, is such a critical thing to happen.
Yeah,
it's that kind of what that 90% attaches to is how the economy is operating. And unless the economy, the way the economy operates shifts, both in terms of the enabling the conditions, like the policy initiatives, and in terms of how things are made and how our food is grown and reaches us, the nature imperative or the nature crisis isn't likely to cease. And that's why it's so critical that it kind of comes out of that niche and becomes everyone's kind of space, if you like, in terms of thinking about it.
I also think it's quite a visual element. I think for those individuals that we were talking about earlier, if you see positive impact from an increased focus on biodiversity, that's quite exciting. You know, if you see the green buildings happening and maybe like more butterflies in your garden, for example, that's quite encouraging in a way that maybe you don't see in something more behind the scenes like supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not even just encouraging, more comfortable. So if we think of cities and the places that we live as having increased green spaces that are healthier places to live because of the way that they're constructed and because of the way that they're planned, like how great is that to be able to live in a space that's healthier for you, more comfortable, because we've reduced the heat island effect from less concrete and more permeable roads and infrastructure. Like that's just a much better life.
Yeah. I think it should be said that it's not without its controversies with that kind of thing. So I'm thinking about my home city of London. The ULEZ policy from the Mayor of London has been quite controversial for cutting down pollution there. I think maybe this leads on to my next question, which is like what the threats are to the circular economy and what the big challenges are. So Sarah, what do you see in institutions maybe?
I think our challenge is to move the circular economy linked to what Eb was...
Eb.
Yeah, super.
What Seb was saying earlier about having the circular economy as an economic agenda.
Yeah.
Our challenge is to move the circular economy out of an environmental agenda into industrialization and economic development ministries, and embedding the circular economy transversally across the policy framework. Because if it's seen as an economic opportunity first and foremost, it really supports the business case for the circular economy. And linked to that, one of our biggest challenges at the moment is we talk about making the economics work.
Yeah.
And so because our economies are hardwired for and by the linear economy, it means that the circular economy, it's difficult to take it out of a niche exception to the norm. And so we need to be creating economic incentives and changing regulations to be able to have the circular economy as the norm rather than the exception. And that conversation is also gaining a lot of momentum at the moment. We have a lot of international institutions and national governments calling for economic reforms, thinking about where subsidies go, thinking about taxes and fee structures, increasing conversations around extended producer responsibility. So again, conversation we were having earlier about the individual, kind of shifting the responsibility from the individual back to the businesses who design these products that we have on the market.
Yeah. Would you see the same thing, Seb, or have you seen other challenges?
I mean, I joined the foundation when I was even younger, 10 years ago in 2014. And I can remember I didn't know what the circle economy was. And someone said to me, the current economy is linear. You take something out of the ground, you make something out of it, it becomes waste. And what we're saying is that there's a different vision for how the economy could work. And like, I found that really profound in that moment because I'd never thought about the economy in that way before, but I immediately recognized that that's how this table is made, that's how this microphone is made. All the things around me followed that model. Most of them followed that model. And then, like, what was already evident at the time was there was actually a macroeconomic opportunity to play for there. The foundation already published several publications that highlighted $1 trillion, $1 billion opportunities, and other consultancies and firms were beginning to identify a similar opportunity. And that's kind of continued during the 10 years I've been at the foundation. And what we've kind of seen is that in that time that it's impossible for someone now to join the foundation without knowing what the circle economy is, because it's prevalent enough as an idea that you can kind of be, if you're in the space, you kind of know what it is, or have some sense of the terminology. And people are chasing that opportunity. But I think the two things that kind of link to what Sarah was saying, I'm just supporting Sarah here. The two things that kind of link to that is that you see the opportunity and you understand you're moving from a line to a circle, but I don't think it's people always embrace what the mindset shift is in attachment to that. Like there's kind of trying to use the same approaches, same thinking to get from that line to a circle, and actually you have to be able to embrace a very different mindset. In my role as content leader, I'm involved in a lot of our learning work, and it's quite interesting. So I've done educational work with both school children and with people with 30 plus years experience in a field. And being able to see the world differently is so much easier for a child in school than it is for someone who's had 30 years of training of seeing it a certain way. Yeah. But the people who can make the change have had the 30 years of training of like, this is how it works. And so that mindset shift, I think, is still a big barrier, like for individuals. And it kind of plays, you can get very senior level buy-in, and then through organizations, that kind of mindset shift has to carry through in terms of how it's operationalized or turned into policy or whatever it might be. And then to Sarah's point, like even if you can see the macroeconomic opportunity, you understand you need new approaches, the whole system from an economics point of view, from the way businesses work and incentivized to the way that the policy and finance mechanisms work, is just geared towards optimized for a linear economy. And shifting those enabling conditions is a big, shifting those conditions is a really big part of making those economics work. And it kind of requires bravery and innovation to cut through, but realizing that can only go so far until the wider system changes. And the kind of foresight to find those kind of levers that really get us towards that kind of tipping point where it becomes, normalized.
And you talked there about how a decade ago, people didn't necessarily know what the circular economy was, and now a lot of people do. Moving on to our final question, I wondered what other progress you'd seen and what some success stories maybe from your time at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have been.
Yeah, and I think broadly, the idea is out there. It's really, for me, like, I have lots of conversations with people about the barriers and the challenges, and like there's a lot of challenging context as well, just in the world currently, geopolitically, in terms of like what the scale of what needs to happen to meet some of the challenges that we've spoken about on this podcast. But what I've had the fortune to kind of witness in my time at the foundation is literally an idea going from not really being spoken about to seeing it in so many policy documents, to seeing it in so many business strategies. And what we've kind of seen is mass kind of piloting, if you like. Like there's so many interesting examples and case studies of the circular economy being put out there into the world by businesses across the built environment, the fashion sector, food world, plastics, name the sector, there's probably some example of the circular economy being delivered by a small business or a large business, and then that converting into the policy world. And, that means there are things in the world now that just didn't exist and have been mobilized by this kind of idea and the potential of this idea. And I think that's a really big thing. That's a huge step for the sort of idea and for the foundation's own, success as well to have happened. And, coming back to the challenges, like there's this kind of wider implementation challenge that absolutely exists, but that's not to underestimate just how much really has happened. Billions of dollars of investment being mobilized, policy packages across a whole range of geographies, and probably hundreds and hundreds of examples of business innovation.
I think also going back to what you were saying earlier about that mindset shift, that's a huge amount of work in the first place. So to have those people advocating for it in those large companies, governments, other places is really very encouraging, I'd say. Sarah, what kind of progress have you seen? How long have you been at the foundation?
Almost 5 years.
Oh, wow. So you've had a good amount of time to watch things unfold.
Yeah, I think so. I think what's exciting for me is that we've seen Chatham House recently publish a report on a global stocktake of roadmaps around the world. So more than 70 roadmaps that they've analyzed, and seeing momentum build kind of around the world. So we don't just have national roadmaps in Europe anymore. Increasingly, we have national roadmaps in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, which is also this increasing awareness around the economic opportunity, not just for developed countries, but for developing countries as well. And we're not just seeing roadmaps that are vision setting and roadmaps that kind of set the direction and the priorities at the country or city level. We have lots of roadmaps at the city level now. But what we're also seeing is more operational plans and action plans to move that strategy into implementation. And there's lots of evidence to support that shift from vision setting to implementation. And I think what's great to see as well is our network members who are also really committed to implementation. So I think the Big Food Redesign Challenge is a fantastic example of food production, food product companies committing to make circular food products that are produced in ways that eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials, and regenerate nature. I think the fashion remodel that was launched just last week, I think, is another fantastic example of moving from not just one product with the jeans redesign, which originally it was like, it's not possible, to it is possible. There are lots of companies now who produce circular jeans, to not just jeans, but actually we're committed to circular revenues. And that's amazing. Like compared to where we were 5 years ago when I joined the foundation, the ambition of businesses as well is just so much bigger compared to where we were.
Yeah. And what would you like to see happen in the next 5 years, maybe?
Oh my goodness, 5 years. I would love to see the circular economy as a core theme as part of COP, the climate change conversations. And I would love to see circular economy as a theme in the biodiversity COPs as well. I think that would definitely see us kind of cementing the circular economy as a systems solutions framework to tackle these big global challenges. And I'd really like to see just kind of, I don't know if we'll get there by the end of the year, but the UN treaty to end plastic pollution, if we have a global treaty with legally binding rules that have comprehensive circular economy measures, we would be kind of a step change further to changing the plastic system, accelerating change there and ending plastic pollution.
Yeah, definitely got our fingers crossed for that one. What about you, Seb? What would you like to see in the next 5 to 10 years happen?
I think, well, I mean, Sarah's given some good examples, but I think just to broaden out, I think that I'd love to see a kind of massive upskilling of people beyond the sustainability teams or beyond the environmental ministries in organizations on circular economies, because that to me is a sign that the circular economy is becoming part of the infrastructure of an organization or policy body. And I'd love to hear people making jokes about the circular economy in a pub. I think that would be a really interesting sign that it's perforating into culture.
Yeah, which is something you've been exploring recently as well, right?
It's something I'm really interested in because I think it speaks to the kind of mainstreaming and normalizing of an idea. And again, like what that exactly means, if they're using the precise term circular economy or if they're using our 3 principles, that's a question. But I think that notion that this way of doing things is somewhat understood and engaged with in a context that people are beginning to recognize it and reflect on it in their own lives would be, to me, a sign that agency from policymakers and businesses is taking action, is beginning to influence people. Sorry, if anyone listening to the podcast, if you hear me hitting the microphone, it's because I'm not a professional podcaster.
Very enthusiastic hands.
So I would say that, yeah, exactly. So that if that is happening in the pub, I think it would be a sign that the agency of policy institutions, financial mechanisms and businesses is taking hold to a point that people are beginning to recognize that a different way of doing things is impacting their lives. And it's culturally understood enough that 2 people can talk about it in a social interaction.
Yeah. And also great ideas come from those pub sessions. So if everyone's got informed on that, then who knows what things we will see in the next decade.
It could be a cafe for people who like coffee, or a walk on the beach, or in the city park as well.
Chat with your mum. Who knows? Well, unfortunately, we're out of time for today, but thank you so much for joining us, Sarah and Seb. And thank you for listening at home. If you have more questions for us in the future, you can email us at podcast@emf.org, or you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify. So we hope you'll join us again next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.